Thank you so much, Dr. Kang, for joining us for the 6th edition of the Global Technology Summit. It is my absolute privilege to be moderating this discussion today. Let me start by asking you a very broad question. The coronavirus pandemic encouraged a great deal of collaboration amongst researchers, private sectors, funders, and regulators to leverage technology to expedite the development of COVID-19 vaccines without compromising its safety and efficacy. Accelerated approvals, supportive regulatory environment, and tireless research by scientists led to the first vaccine being developed and tested in less than 12 months after the first case was officially reported in China in December 2019. But there is a need to sustain this collaborative research ecosystem for manufacturers to develop, produce, and commercialize vaccines not specific to SARS-CoV-2. So in your opinion, how can this collaboration amongst different stakeholders be sustained beyond the current pandemic?
I think one of the things that is really important to recognize about pandemics is that after some time, people ignore the fact that an outbreak of disease is happening because cases come down. This is true of pandemics, it's been true of epidemics, it's generally true of infectious diseases, that if it's not front and center of what the media is covering, then people lose interest in that. And more importantly, politicians lose interest in infectious diseases. Now, if we think about vaccines, then I think the chance of us constantly, every day, every month, every year, developing a new vaccine, that's not likely to happen in the future. But one of the things that has been really interesting about the vaccine platforms that have been developed through and during this pandemic is the nucleic acid vaccines and the vaccines like the vectored vaccines, where it's relatively easy to be able to use the same platform to be able to make lots of different kinds of vaccines targeting many different pathogens. So these platform technologies have tremendous potential for future vaccines to be developed. They won't all succeed. I think we got really lucky, in fact, with SARS-CoV-2, in that both our prior knowledge of MERS, as well as the virology, where the spike protein was the key target, were things that came together to allow us to develop vaccines that quickly. So platform technologies will play a key role. How we sustain interest is by ensuring that we target diseases that are of local interest in the time when there is no pandemic or global concern. India, for example, has plenty of infectious diseases that are not seen in other parts of the world. And to use these platform technologies to develop vaccines for diseases that are of interest to us may be one way of ensuring that there is an ability to sustain both the expertise as well as the manufacturing know-how and infrastructure. It's essentially referred to in the vaccine industry as keeping facilities warm by making sure that they continue to have projects to work on. One of the problems with amplifying vaccine manufacture around the world has been precisely the lack of people that were able to do technology transfers. And if we forget that lesson, then we will be in the same situation again once there is the next pandemic.
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Kang. And just picking up on your point, the past incidences have shown that vaccine development for, say, for example, SARS or Zika was left incomplete because the epidemics ended before the vaccines could be developed. As a result, the funding agencies reallocated funds that had been committed to vaccine development leaving manufacturers with financial losses and setting back other vaccine development programs. So what strategies do you think can be developed to sustain this vaccine development pipeline, even if epidemics appear to end abruptly before vaccines are ready?
Shruti, I think you've pointed out something that has been absolutely a critical barrier for vaccine development in the past, and especially for vaccines for diseases that are not necessarily global. So, for example, Zika was a problem in South America, and people started to worry about it when it came into high-income countries in North America. If we look at Ebola, that is a similar sort of situation. If we look at Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, which we have in India, these are not diseases for which the West has a natural, sustained interest, because these are diseases that they see very rarely. And that results effectively in a market failure where neither the company, which makes vaccines for other more globally prevalent diseases, or the government, which has been a major source of early stage research funding, are interested anymore. They would rather direct their resources elsewhere. So here is where an organization that I'm associated with, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, and similar exercises become really important. What CEPI does is look at pathogens for which there has been market failure, where no big company is interested, and yet there may be some early stage researchers or companies that are working in this area, and it supports them to take their vaccines through early phase testing. Now, in thinking about how CEPI was established, that was the initial model. But what has been realized is that that's insufficient. You actually need to take a vaccine to some form of licensure or approval so that when an outbreak hits, you can actually use the vaccine. What you mentioned about regulatory facilitation is critical for this process. We need to understand how we better study the immune response to be able to give a conditional approval for a vaccine without necessarily checking its efficacy against disease. So Zika is an example. We have vaccines available, but we need to look at how we could license a Zika vaccine without doing a full-fledged phase 3 efficacy trial. So we can do this if we have a correlative protection, which requires a good understanding of the immune response and how that immune response protects against disease. The second approach is to use what is called in the US the animal rule, which is where if you have a truly good animal model that mimics human disease, and you can demonstrate that the vaccine works in studies in animals through doing challenge studies, for example, then you could use the animal data to apply for approval for the vaccine for use in humans. This has been done for anthrax, and a similar approach could be taken for other vaccines in the future. A third approach is to think about human challenge studies, which is unlikely for new pathogens and certainly unlikely for pathogens that are going to be deadly. But for SARS-CoV-2, where we now have an understanding that the case fatality rate is very low, and in young individuals, it's even lower, it has been possible to think about human challenge studies being on the pathway to licensure, not the be all and end all of how we design and develop vaccines or evaluate them, but at least giving us more information about the vaccine that could lead to these vaccines being approved for use in humans. So there are multiple approaches that can be taken. What is critical is partnerships between researchers, between regulators, policymakers, and funders to ensure that we keep going with the development of vaccines.
Yeah. No, so that's right, Dr. Kang. Just like a follow-up question to what you just said, India is especially vulnerable to quite a lot of infectious diseases, right? So, and you've described different approaches. So which one does India follow, if I may ask?
At the moment, the only thing where we have seen a shortened pathway to approvals has been in the case of SARS-CoV-2. And I hope that the regulators will learn from this experience and learn from the partnerships that they have developed with the MHRA, the EMA, and the FDA in order to think about how to support innovation in the vaccine manufacturing space. Before this, India had never gone out and done vaccines on any new platforms. And we recently had our regulator license the first DNA vaccine, or at least approve the first DNA vaccine for use in humans. So this shows that our regulators are learning how to regulate new products. And I hope that this is an approach that will continue. Regulatory science, the ability of regulators to think about what pathways are likely to be required, what considerations there are likely to be in the development of a new product is absolutely essential. It requires a very high level of expertise, not only in the manufacturing and quality control of the product, but also in clinical trial readouts, and in disease biology. I hope that our regulators will be able to build this expertise and support the innovation ecosystem for vaccines.
Yeah, so Dr. Kang, we've already discussed, the role of partnerships in manufacturing vaccines and in like the development of vaccines. So while leveraging technologies to develop a vaccine can solve only one part of the problem, concerns around inequitable distribution of vaccines have become more poignant with the emergence of Omicron, a heavily mutated coronavirus strain in Africa where only 7% of the population is fully vaccinated. So how can countries with existing manufacturing capacities share technology and the knowledge needed to develop and provide vaccines to the developing world? In this context, can India and Africa work together to scale up the manufacturing capacity to better help the developing world?
So I think there has been a lot of discussion, especially about the approach that India and South Africa made around intellectual property sharing. But while I completely agree that if you have either research that has largely been funded by the government in its early and most critical, highest risk stages, as well as when there is a public health need, such as a pandemic, either of those situations should be situations in which intellectual property is shared. But second to that, you need to have the ability to manufacture. And for manufacturing, you will require technology transfer. And the number of individuals in the world that are capable of supporting a technology transfer process is very, very limited. Now, in India, we have a number of vaccine companies. We have had technologies transferred to us for the AstraZeneca vaccine, for the Novavax vaccine, for the vaccine that is being made by Johnson & Johnson or for Johnson & Johnson by Biologically. So a number of technologies that we had not previously used in India have been transferred to us. I think going forward, one of the things that we do need to think about is regional or distributed manufacturing. We already know that the world and WHO in particular are going to be supporting Africa in a big way to develop manufacturing capacity for vaccines. It may start with fill-finish facilities, but ultimately it will be full-fledged manufacture in Africa. Now, we can stand by and watch that happen, or we can be part of the process. And I think for our vaccine companies, it's very important to recognize that this is a huge growth opportunity for us. We need to leverage every partnership that we've had previously with Africa to make sure that our companies are supporting every aspect of the establishment of vaccine manufacturing in regions that don't currently have it. And Africa, of course, is the region with the lowest vaccine coverage and likely the greatest need.
So you have spoken about the role of private sector and how there can be partnerships between India and Africa when it comes to vaccines. But do you envision the Indian NCDC and the African CDC working together in this regard?
I think the African CDC has traditionally had very good ties with the US CDC and with their WHO regional office. I am not sure what else we could bring to the table in terms of surveillance, because in many ways, as we've seen most recently from South Africa, the ability to do pathogen genomics is very high in parts of Africa, and South Africa is certainly trying to support a network of sequencing laboratories across Africa. So perhaps we are a little bit late if we want to engage in the surveillance space, but certainly for vaccine manufacturing and for other kinds of research, I think we have a lot of opportunities for cross-region sharing.
Okay, so I think we've covered many points. So just to summarize, what do you think would be the major lessons that stakeholders could adopt from this current pandemic to be better prepared for future unprecedented biological emergencies?
So one is infectious diseases are not going away, and specifically viruses are not going away. We should plan for, we should prepare for local outbreaks and pandemics to continue to happen. Our climate is changing, the world is changing, and even if we do reduce travel, I think we are going to continue to see infectious diseases emerge, and it's better that we prepare for them ahead of time. It's not that hard to do. We have a reasonable ability to predict which are the organisms, bacteria, viruses, parasites that can change their geographies or change their hosts based on what we already know about them. So if we can predict outbreaks and pandemics, then we need strategies in place to be able to handle those outbreaks. In order to handle those outbreaks, you need people. And people with expertise in infectious diseases have sadly been a shrinking population. That's why we have many irrational statements being made by people who don't really have a background in this area of study. And again, we have to recognize that even in infectious diseases, there are a lot of different kinds of expertise that are needed. The next thing that we need is data and data systems. There is no way to deal with a pandemic if you don't have good quality, adequate data. We know the categories of data that are required. We know the characteristics of the data that are required. And we should build now data systems that can talk to each other instead of being siloed, that would allow us to more fully interrogate the stage at which the pandemic is and how well any interventions that we put in place are performing. At the moment in India, we still continue to struggle, and other parts of the world are also struggling. This is not something that we should repeat again and again. So people, data, data systems. And then finally, the ability to manufacture medical countermeasures is critical. If we look at personal protective equipment, if we look at equipment for hospitals, if we look at vaccines, biologicals, drugs, diagnostics, we need all of these. And the only way that we are going to have them is if we actually have a strategy to be able to ramp up production across different platforms as quickly as possible. This requires an incredible degree of coordination and governance. And the better we have, the better our pandemic preparedness plans are, and the more rapidly we can ramp them up, the better we will be able to handle the next epidemic or pandemic, which will come.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Kang, for this enriching and insightful discussion. As I said, it was my privilege, and I learned a lot during this discussion. And I thank you so much once again for joining for this discussion, and I look forward to hosting you in person for the future editions of the Global Technology Summit. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Shruti.